Konnichiwa minasan, it is me, your Seph-sama. This video is a compilation of previous Topic Corner of Culture that was uploaded on Seph-57 Purashu. As you probably know, some of the topics in this video will be about stuff that you already know about and you've heard of in the Story of Seph-sama video. So don't be surprised if you hear information you already know about. I thought this would be something fun for you soulings to watch while I'm working on the next review. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Enjoy the video. Other than Nintendo, who is the worst game developer in the world? Well, this is an interesting topic. As you soulings know, I've been preaching for years that Nintendo is a dangerous company and a threat to the gaming industry. They are involved with the criminal organization Yakuza and are forcing smaller developers to bow down and do whatever they ask them to. So of course, Nintendo is the worst game company in the world. But is there a company almost as bad as Nintendo? Or even just as bad as Nintendo? Yes, the second worst game company in the world is From Software. I have done reviews of 3 of their games, that being Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, and I've mentioned Dark Souls 2 in passing, as well as playing Dark Souls 3 on fighting streamers. I would check those reviews out if you are interested in a more in-depth review of the games. But I think most of you would agree that From Software can't design good gameplay. With Dark Souls, they did such a bad job at making a hack and slash game that they had to up the difficulty and then market it as a game that is hard to beat, so that clueless gamers would just want to play the game to show off their skills, being completely unaware that the game is just badly designed to begin with. Bloodborne is just Dark Souls with another name and theming to trick players into thinking they're getting a new game with new gameplay. But instead they're just getting Dark Souls with less features and less mechanics. Not to mention that they tricked Sony by going under a different name so that they could become an exclusive title for the PlayStation 4. And in Sekiro they tried to hide the fact that the combat is bad by putting in a half-assed stealth system. I should also talk about their betrayal to Japanese culture. You see, From Software is a company that is not interested in their own culture. There is even evidence enough that would suggest that they even hate Japanese culture. Almost all of their games are modeled after Western games, history and culture, and when they try to do something with Japanese culture in it, they just do it just to trick gamers into buying the game, when in reality they have no idea about how Japanese culture works. If I'm being honest here, I think that if it wasn't for Nintendo's criminal records, From Software would be the worst video game developer in the world. At least Nintendo keeps their garbage baby games on their baby garbage consoles. From Software tricks honorable Japanese game companies like Sony and then try to sneak their games onto the PlayStation platform, which makes me sick. So that is why From Software is the second worst game developer in the world. Dear Seph-57, what are some major influences in becoming the person you are today? How did you discover Japanese culture? Well, I talked about this briefly in my Q&A 2 video, but I think I need to go over this in more detail. So this must have been when I was around 13 to 14 years old, where I was going through some tough times. You see, I never fit into any group of people, and I really felt like an outsider. I hadn't really discovered who I was yet, which is something that most teenagers go through. I was not very familiar with manga, anime, and Japanese culture. All I knew is that I liked a lot of video games, like Final Fantasy VII, Xenogears, and Sonic the Hedgehog. Of course I had seen some animes, such as Space Adventure Cobra, Ginga, and Starzinger. But at the time I didn't actually know that they were from Japan or that they were made by Japanese geniuses. Since all of them were translated into Swedish, I watched a lot of that as a kid. I didn't even know terms such as anime and manga at the time. When I wasn't hanging around with my ex-friend Joachim, all I did in my childhood and teenage years was to study and play video games. I didn't really have anything else to do. I would always spend time after school in the school library, where I would be studying for about 2 hours every day. I didn't have any friends at all in school, but I didn't get picked on that much either. I was just mostly ignored during my time in school. But then something happened on one fateful winter day. It hadn't started snowing yet, but the days were pretty short since the sun would go down really early. And by the time our school days ended, it was pitch black outside, like it was midnight. I decided to go to the school library, like usual, even though we didn't have any homework, and we didn't have any tests coming up, since the holidays were getting close. But I was so used to going to the school library that I had to at least stop by there for a little while. And when I sat down at my usual spot, all the way back in the library, behind the bookshelf, I noticed that the shelf next to me, that is usually empty, was now filled with paperback books that I had not seen before. I was curious about these new books, so I grabbed the closest one, and when I flipped it over to the cover, it said, Naruto, Volume 5, by Masashi Kishimoto. Yes, I had for the first time in my life discovered manga. I had never seen this kind of art before in my life. There was just so much color, detail, and personality put into these characters that I get even more curious to reading it. But not before opening it from the wrong side, just to get a warning page that told me that I was reading it from the wrong side. Now don't judge the young Seph here. Just like I said, this was the first time I've experienced manga, so I didn't know that mangas are read from right to left. So I started reading, and what I saw was the moment when Team 7 first met Rock Lee and they started fighting. Even though I knew nothing about these characters, I just couldn't stop reading. I felt so connected to the emotions and the troubles these characters were facing. And the humor was something that made me laugh several times. And before I knew it, I had read through all of Volume 5. And I didn't even intend to read it all, I was just gonna take a little peek. Luckily for me, the library was stocked with the first 8 volumes of Naruto. So I grabbed the first volume and started reading. After a while, our librarian came over to see what I was gasping and laughing at, since I was usually so quiet every time I studied there. She was an old, very kind lady that always helped me out when I was looking for books that I needed for studying, in exchange for me helping her out with carrying books and putting them on shelves she couldn't reach. And she also mentioned how wonderful it was for me to be invested into something that wasn't just schoolwork. So after reading through Volume 1 through 4, and while I was reading through Volume 5 again, the librarian showed up again, and this time she brought with her tea and cookies, as thanks for always helping out around the library. So I spent the rest of my time in the library reading through the rest of the volumes, while I was drinking tea and eating cookies. It was a wonderful time for self-discovery, but also for finding something that I enjoyed so much, which is why Naruto holds a special place in my heart. Unfortunately, I had to leave since the school was closing. I didn't realize it was 7 PM and that I had spent 4 hours reading Naruto. But I noticed that there were more books that were similar to Naruto on the shelf. It was the first 22 volumes of Dragon Ball, and I really wanted to read them too, but since I had to leave, I couldn't read them. But our librarian was kind enough to let me borrow the first 10 volumes of Dragon Ball and take them home with me. Konnichiwa, Seph-sama. I have a question for you. Can Hideo Kojima be saved, or is it too far gone? Arigato, Seph-sama, and keep being sugoi. Okay, I think it's important that I start this one with an explanation. You see, in February I made a video where I talked about Kojima and his time at Konami. In that video, I talked about the truths of Kojima and how he not only betrayed Konami, but Japan as a whole by tricking, lying, and working together with Westerners. Some very bad things happened, which led to Konami having to fire Kojima after the production of Metal Gear Solid 5 was completed. And for good reasons, mind you. But if you're interested in hearing more about this truth, I suggest that you head over to the video link that I have in the description of my video, The Truth About Kojima and Konami. But let's get to the matter at hand. Can Kojima be saved? Or rather, can he redeem himself after what he has done? And I would say, yes, I think so. Now I think it's important to recognize the difference between how From Software and Nintendo betrayed Japanese culture to how Kojima did it. Nintendo and From Software has always made these respectful games in a shady, and in Nintendo's case, criminal way. But we have to remember that Kojima knows how to make good games. He used to make sugoi Japanese games, like Metal Gear Solid, which only had some westernness sprinkled in. Which is fine, as long as the games keep their core Japanese design. And games like Son of the Enders, a game all about Japanese mechs, which is definitely something from Japanese culture. Now what could drive a man to change his mentality on game and culture design like this? We do know he didn't start out this way. So, what happened? I think Kojima is extremely misguided because he has been hanging around too many rude Westerners, and it must have rubbed off on him. Now don't get me wrong, I think Kojima should be punished for what he did to Konami and Japan. But I think if we convince him that the old games that he made is way better designed than what he currently is doing, I think he can be saved. But if I'm being honest here, I think the chances of him returning to Japan and make glorious Japanese games again is just as much of a chance as it is for Sasuke to return to the Hidden Leaf Village when he was young. He's too far gone at this point. I would be really surprised if he make a Son of the Enders anytime soon. He will still be a traitor, and nothing is going to change that. He will have to do a lot to make up for what he has done. Now let's see how his baby movie simulator does in sales. That will determine his path as a game designer or fake movie designer. For the video topic, we would like to know how you first found out about JRPGs, anime, and reject your gaijin ways to become Sephiroth Sword 57 we all know and love today. Well, I already talked about how I discovered and how I really understood Japanese culture for the first time. So this is a good time to talk about how I was before the discovery and what happened afterwards. Well, to put it simply, I was pretty much only a video game fan for the first 13 years of my life. I didn't even know that these expertly crafted games that I played as a child was made by amazing Japanese game designers. Sure, I knew there were Japanese video game developers out there. I've been a fan of Sega and Sony for a long time after all. But I didn't know how important that detail actually was. Now let me tell you of an early gaming memory from my childhood. When I was 4 years old, I got my very own exclusive copy of Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Mega Drive, along with a Mega Drive console. That was during the fall of 1991. This is one of the best games I've ever played, and even as a young man, I even understood that this game was special. It was at this point that my path was set, and my discovery of Japanese culture was inevitable. I didn't know at the time, But 6 years later, I would experience something that would change my perspective on game design and storytelling design for the rest of my life. That's right, it was the very end of 1997 that I would be able to experience this masterpiece. Yes, it was Final Fantasy VII. My first very own experience to the JRPG genre, and it was the very best one at that. Final Fantasy VII is a game I would recommend anyone to play right now. Never before had I seen a game like this. I was immediately intrigued, and I wasn't the only one thinking that, as most Westerners had Final Fantasy VII as their first experience of Japanese culture and JRPG. But with this masterpiece, a new world had opened up to me, and I would experience more JRPGs after another. Games like Chrono Trigger, Suikoden, Final Fantasy Tactics, and Grandia, just to name a few. Now these games were based on modern fantasy trends, so if you didn't know much about Japanese culture, most of these finer details that were in there would go unnoticed to most Westerners. Unfortunately, that means a lot of people missed out on games like Persona, which takes place in modern Japanese Japan and follows Japanese high school students. A lot of people didn't understand and skipped the games entirely, which is a shame. So for the next couple of years, I would keep playing JRPGs on my Sony PlayStation and Sega Dreamcast until that fateful day where I discovered myself in my school library, which I've already talked about in that other video. But what happened after that big event? Well, I started searching for any kind of manga I could get my hands on. Naruto, Dragon Ball, Bleach, One Piece, Hajime no Ippo, iShield 21, Black Cat, Death Note, you name it. And I also rediscovered anime again after not watching since I was a child. I rewatched all of Hokuto no Ken in the original Japanese, being able to watch every episode ever made. And of course, I had to watch Naruto and Dragon Ball so that I can see my favorite scenes from the manga animated, as well as some exclusive content only available in the anime. Now, anime was really hard to get a hold of in the early 2000s. There was no streaming service like Crunchyroll, and most releases didn't even get a Western physical release. Fan subtitles were still pretty rare, but there were still groups out there that were willing to take their time out of their day to bring you the newest episode of Naruto the day after it was aired in Japan. Now while I have some respect for these people who did this, I am not okay with stealing art. So I had my brother Dave download them for me instead. I also studied a lot of Japanese history and culture when I took my time off in the library after reading manga. And after some time, I slowly but surely became the person you see in front of you today. I realized that in my heart I wasn't really a Westerner at all, and I am happy that I discovered this while still being young. I now live the lifestyle of a Japanese man, and with that, I really saw how ungraceful and lame Western culture really is. So after years of studying and experiencing a higher culture, I realized that there wasn't a single YouTube channel out there that would bring out the truths and talk about Japanese culture, and after a while I started getting frustrated that nobody wanted to share Japanese culture with the West at all. But one day I realized something. The reason why there were no YouTube channels like that was not because they were lazy or didn't want to. No, it was actually because nobody knew about it. Nobody knew that Japanese animation is superior to Western animation. Nobody knew that Japanese game design is superior to Western game design. And nobody knows the fact that Nintendo has ties to the Yakuza and that Kojima betrayed Japanese culture and turned Westerners against everyone in Japan. I was shocked to find out that people didn't know anything about this stuff, and since nobody had talked about it yet, it was my duty to take it in my own hands and do it myself. I decided at that point that I wanted to upload YouTube videos and become a YouTuber, to show the West how much sugoi and superior Japanese culture really is. Which leads us to today. Would you ever consider reviewing any of the fanfics out there? Now Jokerstorm Dono also added a link to the message to a specific fanfic he wanted me to look at. But I can't say I would take my time to review all of these unofficial Sephiroth Sword 57 fanfictions that are out there. And since this isn't a review show, I can't talk in depth about these written stories about Seph-sama. But I can definitely talk about Sephiroth Sword 57 fanfiction in general. I have greatly enjoyed the fanfictions I've read so far, and it's interesting to see the Swordlings' take on the Sephiroth Sword 57 lore. I should address that these written stories are not canon to the Sephiroth Sword 57 show or Sephiroth Sword 57 Gaiden. These are not my visions for the Sephiroth Sword 57 lore. But seeing the Swordlings take their time and effort into writing something based off of my creation is very heartwarming, and it makes me want to work harder. Some of the fanfics I read, like the one from Mr. Swordling called Crossed, have an original battle story based on the character of the Sephiroth Sword 57 show, as well as some original characters and Swordlings thrown into the mix. Not only do you get to experience a blood-pumping action anime story written on paper, but you will also see this author's take on the Sephiroth Sword 57 show and how they interpret it. This place doesn't unofficially take place anywhere on the Sephiroth Sword 57 timeline, but it is instead its self-contained story. And there's also stories that take what I have made in the past and continue the story from that point on unofficially. Like the fanfiction A New Threat Appears by Muffin-san, which is a direct unofficial continuation of the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild review that I made in 2017. But it's incredible to see what happens and what new characters that will show up, both heroes and villains. Which is somewhat accurate to how some of my videos are written. Definitely an interesting take on the content that I've made, but with a personal twist to it as well. Really interesting. But what made these stories so much more enjoyable was the fact that they include Swordlings from real life in there in a very graceful and respectful way. You might even recognize your name in there somewhere. This is not only an interesting way to write stories about your favorite content creator on YouTube, but it is also a great way for you to improve as a writer of stories. Writing fanfics around the Sephiroth Sword 57 universe is a great way of improving your writing, since there's already established characters and settings for the Swordlings to use, and they can even bring up new ones that would fit the stories really well. I would very much recommend checking out Mr. Swordling Dono and Muffin Dono's fanfictions. They are really interesting to read, even though they're not actually part of the Sephiroth Sword 57 lore. As for Sephiroth Sword 57 fan creations in general, if you've made any art that is related to Sephiroth Sword 57, I would suggest you go to the subreddit where you can post your stuff. You can also reach out on me on Twitter, where you can also post them. I would love to see your Swordlings creations. Fan art, AMVs, fanfiction, and anything that is considered art, you can send that my way or post it on the subreddit. For the topic video, we really want to see some new Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu moves, and maybe some background information about how you came up with the style and where you trained. We Swordlings want to train under you, Seph-sensei. Well, this is a great question. You see, Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu is a form of martial art that I've invented. It takes all the great moves from the most super sugoi Eastern martial arts out there, and combining them with moves from manga, anime, JRPGs, and video games. The main principle behind the Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu martial art is that it is an offensive and defensive form of martial arts, meaning that you are attacking as well as blocking at the same time. Now I have to mention right now that I plan on using Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu for the Sephiroth Sword 57 Gaiden anime series. Which reminds me, if you haven't watched Sephiroth Sword 57 Gaiden episode 1, I would suggest you go and check it out right now. Anyway, I don't want to spoil the Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu style just yet, but I can go over some of the more basic details. Now I used to practice all kinds of martial arts in my younger days, super sugoi Japanese ones such as Shorinjin Kempo, Judo, Karate, Jujutsu, Kenjutsu, Shinobi no Jutsu, Judo, Kendo, Aikido, and Kyudo. I also trained in some Chinese ones such as Hongjia, Baji Qian, and Yongshun. But I've also experienced Western ones that derives from a combination of Eastern martial arts such as Sambo, MMA, and Krav Maga. So I definitely have a lot of experience with martial arts, which earns me the right to create my own style. Now the main idea of Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu is that we take all these martial arts and we combine them together with fictional martial arts. On one side, we have live-action martial arts that we all are so familiar with, and on the other side, we have manga, anime, and JRPGs. And what if we combine them together? That's right, this style is a mix of both of them. I have a saying when it comes to Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu. If it's offensive and defensive at the same time, anything works. That means that any combination of attacks are allowed as long as it follows the offensive plus defensive rule. It could be a move from Karate mixed with one from Iaido, a move from Chinese Kempo mixed with a move from Naruto, a move from Hunter x Hunter mixed with a move from Street Fighter. This martial art is open to any move that is useful. I'm sure that all of you subjects watching this video already have some ideas for what you want to use as a move. But remember, it has to go through and be accepted by the Kaiso, meaning me. Just remember that it has to be offensive and defensive at the same time. That is a very important rule to follow. Now there are also some other useful techniques that you can use to ward off uninvited yokai that tries to possess you when you get stronger. This is what I like to refer to as Dimension Cross Meditation. This is very important to anyone who practices Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu. You see, Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu is a very powerful martial art and can be very alluring to evil spirits and yokai. But not only that, the human body can only withstand so much. So this form of meditation is key to keeping your human body intact while practicing Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu. I have a video uploaded to this channel to show off what a typical meditation of Dimension Cross Ryubudo Taijutsu looks like. I'll have a link down in the description for you to watch. Anyway, there are 3 important rules for this form of meditation. Ichi, find a room that is empty, or at least one that doesn't have a lot of furniture in them, and then turn the lights off, and then light 4 to 5 candles. Ni, make sure you have these tags present in the room while you meditate. They will help capture evil spirits and yokai that tries to possess you. I have to use around 8 to 12 of these every time I meditate, but for you swordlings who are just starting out, I would suggest using 1 to 2 of these tags. You will figure out if you need more tags later, if there are more yokai in the room when you get stronger, which is probably what's gonna happen. You will need more of these, definitely. I'll let you take a closer look. Pause the video. Good. Son, make sure that during meditation that you chant what you value most in your life. This will help you to keep your power level in check and help you stay calm in later fierce situations. The position of your hands can be important, but you have to figure that out on your own, since it differs from person to person. But anyway, there isn't much else I can add to this topic for the moment. I'd love to share more of Dimension Cross Ryobudo Taijutsu, but that will have to be at a later date. I'm sure that most of you swordlings will be much stronger by then. A while ago I decided to splurge a little and got some of the more expensive instant ramen, but when I cooked them, they didn't really taste right. Could I have purchased a shoddy brand? Can you give us a quick ramen rundown to help swordlings avoid mistakes like this in the future? Okay, this is a very good and interesting topic for you ramen lovers out there. Now, there are a lot of places in the world where getting authentic Japanese ramen is very hard to come by. So instant ramen is the way to go for a lot of people. And if you are one of them, keep an eye out for this logo right here. Nissin makes the best instant ramen out there, with a lot of variety. I have a bunch of different ramen to suggest, so sit tight my swordlings. The ones I would recommend are Nissin Chicken Ramen. This one is a classic, but sadly is very hard to come by, unless you have a local Asian store you can go to, but you might have to import from Japan, which could get a little bit expensive. But it is worth it because this ramen is perfect for eggs. There's a little indent in the ramen block where you can crack an egg into and let it steam cook while you're waiting for your ramen to finish. Just make sure to put a lid on top or some plastic wrap so that it will cook properly. Next up is Nissin Demae Ramen. This one should be pretty common, and even if it isn't, it shouldn't be very expensive. This is some of the more cheaper Nissin ramen brands, and will go probably under 100 yen. And the ramen block is actually a little bit bigger than other brands. This Nissin brand comes in many different flavors: beef, chicken, shrimp, curry, and more. This is the one I usually go for, mostly because of the availability of it. And if it's not in your area, don't worry, it shouldn't be very expensive to order. And you don't have to worry about additional import fees. Very good flavor, and one pack should be enough if you're feeling hungry. Next up we have Nissin Yakisoba. This cup ramen has a special kind of lid that lets you drain the excess water when the ramen has been rehydrated. And of course it comes with a sachet of classic yakisoba seasoning sauce. Very oishii, and a little bit more common than you would think. So you probably won't be having any problems finding it here in the West. It's a little bit on the expensive side, but I would say it's worth it. Next up we have, of course, the classic Nissin cup noodles. Do I really need to say anything? This is different than the pack ramen you might be used to, as this one does not only include a sachet of seasoning powder, but also some dried vegetables and mushrooms that will soften up when you pour the hot water into the cup. And the contents may vary depending on the flavor, but there are those that would prefer the normal packs of ramen compared to the cups, just for this reason. Some people don't want the bits of vegetables in there, so it all comes down to your preference. But you should never give the classic cup noodles a pass. If you never had them before, go out and try it. It's really sugoi. And those are some of the ramen I would suggest, but any Nissin brand should be sugoi. As for brands you shouldn't buy, don't buy anything that's not from Japan or that is not a Japanese brand. There are some fake ramen out there from China, Thailand, and other Asian countries that are trying to trick you, and those are the brands that you're not gonna like. And never buy anything that is made in the West. As for making my own ramen, well, I'm glad you asked. You can actually buy big packs of ramen that doesn't contain any seasoning sachets or oil or anything like that. And those are perfect for making your very own instant ramen at home. And here's how you do. Have some vegetable stock ready. Either the solid cubes or liquid kind would work, and put that in a cooking pot with boiling water. A saucepan could also work if you don't have anything else. You then put in the ramen block and season it with salt and pepper, as well as some paprika powder and soy sauce, and then turn the heat off. After the boiling stops, you can crack an egg in there for some oishi egg flavor. And there you go, just wait for the egg to cook to your liking, and you have yourself a perfect Seph-sama styled ramen. Let me know if you sortlings tried out this recipe and what you think. Konnichiwa Seph-sama. We all know that there are so many sugoi dishes in Japan, but I'd like to know what are some Swedish dishes you would recommend. Perhaps you could even teach us how to make Seph-approved food. Oh, another food-related topic, I see. And to give you a quick answer, yes, there are some really tasty dishes here in Sweden. And I will go over some of them that I like the most. These are the ones that my mom cooked for me as a child, and they are the most nostalgic dishes that I know, since they are connected to JRPGs, Japanese games, and anime for me. First off is a classic, falukorv. This one is a tasty yet cheap type of sausage that can be cooked in several different ways. It can be served with potatoes, boiled or mashed. You can serve it with macaroni and pasta dishes in general. Or you can partially slice it and cover the cracks with cheese, onion, and apple slices, and then cook it in the oven. There are several different ways to serve this food, which makes it the perfect JRPG gaming snack. Speaking of, there is also called stroganoff, which is a falukorv version of beef stroganoff, and it's served together with rice, which is really sugoi. Next up, we have a dish called Flying Jacob, a casserole made of chicken, cream, chili sauce, bananas, peanuts, and bacon. Easy to make and subarashi for late night anime watching. I remember watching the climax of the pain arc from Naruto while eating this dish, a real classic. While we're on the topic of casseroles, here is another dish called Johnson's Temptation, which is a casserole made of potatoes, onion, anchovy, and cream. Another dish that is very fitting for late night anime watching. Same rule applies here. Easy to make and oishi. But let's move on to something a little bit more simple. Pitipana. This dish is potatoes, meatballs, sausage, and pork diced up into small cubes and then fried in a pan. A good meal for you who stayed up late playing Devil May Cry 3 the day before and need something quick to eat. But make sure to add a fried egg to the side of this dish as well. And last but not least, meatballs. Your typical meatball is usually made out of ground beef and pork, along with breadcrumbs and finely chopped onions, and is served together with potatoes, gravy, and lingonberry jam. I think you all can see a pattern here. All these dishes are perfect for when you're consuming Japanese entertainment. They're all easy to make and taste pretty good. It's almost like we Swedes had Japanese culture in mind when making these dishes. But I also have some variations of my own that I would like to add to these dishes. Something like adding ramen or rice to these dishes will make them more interesting. I have tried switching out the potatoes to rice in pitipana, and adding ramen to Flying Jacob, and it's really sugoi. I would definitely suggest that you add some Japanese flavor to your country's dishes. It will always work. There are of course some other dishes that I like that I couldn't talk about in this video, and didn't really have much to say about in general. But these are some of my favorite Swedish dishes. Konnichiwa Seph-sama. We want to know about your favorite anime openings, and what do you think are the best ingredients for a really good anime opening, and what not to do in an anime opening, maybe. Now this is a very good topic indeed, since these two questions go hand in hand, I think would be a really interesting discussion. Now there are two ways you can make a really sugoi anime opening. The opening obviously needs some catchy tunes to get your attention, and it also needs to show off the entire cast up to that point, since it will be important for the viewers to know what these characters are all about. So showing off their personality is a must, as well as showing off some of their special attacks or fighting techniques. A good example of this is the second opening to Naruto, Haruka Kanata, which is one of my favorite openings of all time. Here you can see that they're showing off all the important characters up to that point in the story, as well as doing some really sugoi animation and some really catchy music as well. But it's also important to show off that the characters are villains or heroes. And this opening is very good at showing that off as well. Not to mention the absolute amazing song by Asian Kung Fu Generation, Haruka Kanata. This song has been with me ever since the mid-2000s, and I still listen to it to this day. Always have it on in my headphones and listening to it. I always listen to this song while practicing Japanese martial arts, since it gets you really pumped and wants to make you go stronger. Another thing I mentioned earlier that is important is the animation quality. I particularly like this part of the opening, where you can see the camera swirling around the characters. It is a really nice way to show off the characters, not only from the front, but the sides and the back as well, which lets you see the whole design of the character. Really amazing work there. Now there is one more way you can make an anime opening, and that is by showing off the whole story for that opening's arc in the opening without spoiling anything. Going from the beginning of the opening, which is also the beginning of the arc, to the end of the opening, which is the end of the arc, without spoiling anything, is surely a hard task. And that is why not many have tried this out, which is understandable. But there is one show that was able to do this flawlessly. And that is the first opening to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Sonoshi no Sadame. This opening showed the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Phantom Blood, and without spoiling anything, you know exactly what is going on, which is really amazing. But not only that, they also use some CGI, which is a very sensitive topic in the anime community. Most people don't like CGI, but just look at this. This is some of the most masterfully crafted anime openings I've seen using CGI. Do I really need to say any more about the animation? Just look at this. But that is actually not all. The song Sonoshi no Sadame that is used in this opening is really sugoi, and it fits the tone of the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Phantom Blood, perfectly. Just how the song starts off really confident, just like the young Jonathan Joestar, and then turn into a more sad tone, which reflects the adult Jonathan Joestar very well as well. This is something a lot of opening creators don't tackle because it's a very tasking job. But as you can see, if they know what they're doing, it is really sugoi. I suggest that you solely go out and listen to Haruka Kanata and Sonoshi no Sadame as well, as they are amazing songs that I listen to every day. Review some subarashi Japanese candy. Well, this video will probably be a little bit on the shorter end, and that is because I don't really enjoy candy that much. I do enjoy carbonated drinks like soda, and also some snacks like chips and similar. I have tried out some Japanese candy while I was over there, and I have also imported some. And I will say they are really subarashi, but like I said, I can't really eat that much sweets. I know a lot of people that have eaten a lot of sweets though, and they have said that Japan has some of the best sweets in the world, which is not very surprising in my opinion. And I will also say that this is not a review show, so I'm not gonna review any candy or game or anime or anything like that. I already addressed this in the past. This is not a review show, okay? But anyway, I think it will be easier if I talk about my favorite snack and my encounters with it. And that is of course my favorite, Pocky. The first time I tried Pocky was a long time ago when I discovered anime and manga for the first time. I heard a lot of anime characters talk about Pocky, and I even seen some in these shows. So I was of course curious to how these tasted. And at the time I imported 10 different packs of Pocky to my house. And I think they're really sugoi, as they're not too sweet for my tastes. For those of you that don't know, Pocky are sticks of bread that are covered in chocolate, and they are really sugoi. I used to eat this all the time while I was playing Star Ocean 3 and Suikoden 5. But I haven't had Pocky in a long time now. The last time I had it was about 2 years ago. But I feel like I'm craving it a lot lately, since I've been playing a lot of JRPGs, and it is the perfect snack for playing JRPGs. The flavors of Pocky that I've eaten the most is the chocolate one and the strawberry one, but I do prefer the chocolate one, to be honest. But I think they're both really oishi, and you should all try them out. But unfortunately there's not much else I can say about sweets and candy at the moment. I'm a very big fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and have been for a long time. I absolutely love a Japanese interpretation of other cultures and genres in shows and manga. Adventure odysseys, Italian gang dramas, old westerns, etc. So I want to know your thoughts about Japanese anime adding a sugoi touch to these western cultures and genres. Well, this is a very interesting topic indeed. Now, I've mentioned a little bit about this in the past, but I think anime and the Japanese in general are better at interpreting Western culture than the Westerners are themselves. And I think JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a very good example of that. Now, I mentioned in the past that I don't think JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is that amazing. I do think it's a good show, but I think it misses a lot of good things there are in shonen anime, such as training montage and longer enemy battles. I think the main cast just getting stronger out of nowhere is kinda weird, and I think the fights are way too short, only being 1 to 3 episodes long. But when it comes to this topic, that part doesn't really matter, as we're talking about Western interpretation in anime, which JoJo's Bizarre Adventure does amazingly. Western characters like Jonathan Joestar, Joseph Joestar, and others are really amazing. But we also have Europeans like Jean-Pierre Polnareff, who is from France, as well as Africans with Muhammad Abdur, who is from Egypt. And all of these characters are very well written and likable, which is something a lot of Westerners can't even capture in their media. Now when it comes to genres, the Japanese wins as well. Stuff like space dramas and horror are just way better when in the hands of a Japanese man. And even very Western genres, such as the cowboy Western genre, it's also better in the hands of a Japanese. While it is not an anime, the game Wild Arms is much better than any Western show or film that you've ever seen. Wild Arms has a Western theme to it, but it also adds fantasy elements, such as magic and other stuff that makes it more interesting. Stuff that you will never see in a Western genre. Genres can be very tricky. You don't want to fall into any stereotypes while making them, which is why the Japanese does it the best. They usually add a little bit of Japanese flavor to these Western genres, which makes them more interesting. I think the best way to experience this is just to watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, since it goes over so many different genres and characters from Western culture, and you will see how much better the Japanese are at capturing the essence of Western culture and how to make it good. Hello Sephiroth Sword 57. I have a question regarding music. What kind of music do you listen to? Perhaps any recommendations? As a follow-up question, what song would you play at your funeral? Oh wow, let's talk about music, my swordlings. Now, ever since I was a young boy, I've always been interested in Japanese music. There are a really good number of Japanese bands out there, and I'm gonna list a few of them that I like the most. This list is in alphabetic order. Let's go! Asian Kung Fu Generation, Animetal, Baby Metal, Diren Grey, Flow, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Gilgamesh, Jam Project, Arc-en-Ciel, Maximum the Hormone, and Ulfos. Now these are only a couple of the ones that I really enjoy. And as you can notice, I am a huge fan of J-Rock. At the age of 6 years old, I first heard Aiwo Toromodose by Crystal King, which is one of my favorite anime openings of all time. And after that, I was really intrigued by Japanese music in general. And you can probably notice that most of these bands have made anime openings in the past. Like the band Pornograffiti, who made the opening to Great Teacher Onizuka, Full Metal Alchemist, and My Hero Academia. Bands like Maximum the Hormone, who did an opening to Death Note, and the band Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, who made the first opening to Baki from 2018. These are all really amazing songs that should be praised all over the world, but there's still a lot of people outside of Japan that haven't even heard about these bands, which to me is just awful. Japanese music should be celebrated all over the world, but instead we all listen to this garbage music here in the West that is on the radio all the time. Awful sounding Western pop music that is just painful to the ears. Now these are all Japanese bands, but let me talk about one band that I really enjoy that is a Western one. And that is Crush 40. That's right, the band that made the music to most of the Sonic games. I can still remember the song the first time I played City Escape in Sonic Adventure 2, and most of you have probably listened to my cover of that song. So it should tell you that I'm a really big fan of this band. And the reason for that is, I really love video game soundtracks. And of course, Sonic the Hedgehog has some of the best music in video game history. But there's one composer that I think you all heard about that is the best composer in all of video games, and that is Nobuo Uematsu. Uematsu-san is famous for making music to all the famous Square Enix JRPGs, but he's mostly famous for composing the absolutely amazing soundtracks to the Final Fantasy franchise. He is an inspiration to all musicians out there, and you should all go out and just listen to the music. And even better, you should all go out and play the games he's made music for. I am 100% sure that you will all enjoy it. Now for Wormhammer's follow-up question. My funeral. What would I play at my funeral? Well, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I have come up with one answer. Samurai Soul by Ulfos would be absolutely amazing for funeral. You should all go and listen to Samurai Soul by Ulfos, and you will understand why I picked that song. Dear Seph-sama, my brother and I are longtime fans, and we've been curious. Are you a twin? Who is older, you or your brother? And are you close to your brother? Well, I guess this is something that I haven't really talked about that much in the past. For those of you that don't know, I have a brother named Dave, who is my twin brother. Yes, he is my twin. He was born just moments before me. And yes, I guess we are pretty close. But the thing here is that me and Dave didn't really grow up together. Here's why. When me and Dave were 3 years old, our parents got separated. Yes, they had a divorce. So what happened is that our parents sold the house we were living in, and they both moved away, separating both us brothers. I got to stay with Kasan, and Dave got to stay with Otosan. And our parents were pretty adamant about not talking to each other or seeing each other whatsoever. So that means that me and Dave from the age 3 to 14 actually never saw much of each other, which could explain how different our tastes are when it comes to games, since Dave is a big Nintendo fan and I actually like good games. Anyway, I said that we didn't get to see each other that much until we were 14 years old. And the reason for that is, after 11 years of not talking to each other, our parents ran into each other while they were out grocery shopping. And from then on they started talking more and more, and after a while they decided to get back together. They got remarried and are even today still living happily with each other. But at the age of 14, which by the way was the same year that I discovered myself, me and my brother Dave moved in together with our parents. They bought a house at the beginning of summer that year, and I lived there up to the age of 20. And during that time, me and my brother Dave got to hang out quite a lot. But at the end of that summer, my brother got into a boarding school, so he wasn't home that much during 2 years of his time at the school, except for the summers and the holidays, of course. But after he got home, we got to hang out a lot more, since he also likes a lot of Japanese media and culture. We got along pretty well, and we even like a lot of video games, even though he enjoys a lot of Nintendo games for some reason. But that is all I can say about Dave right now. We talk multiple times a week, and when I come over, we usually hang out and watch some anime together. I am visiting Japan next year and would love to hear some advice on where to go, what to eat, sights to see, and anything you recommend to do in Japan. Oh wow, this is a fun question. Okay, so, place to visit in Japan. And of course, the first thing you will probably want to hear about is Tokyo. And yes, Tokyo is the best city in the entire world. A city plentiful of places to eat food, to play arcade games, and spots to visit. Now I would mention specific places to go and eat, but I think the best part of Tokyo is just go around and just pick a spot you want to eat. There are so many restaurants and bars in Japan that you can visit, and all of them are of course of varying quality. But even the ones in the worst conditions were still really cozy and still had really good food, in my opinion. Since restaurant business is very important in Japan, they can't serve bad food to their customers, no matter how run down the restaurant or bar is. So that is something to keep in mind. Now one specific place of Tokyo that I need to go visit is absolutely Akihabara. Also known as Otaku Heaven, Akihabara is the place to go if you want to get some collectibles, play video games, buy video games, and manga and anime. It is absolutely the place for fans of Japanese media. Other than that, I would also recommend to go visit some Meido cafes, as they are super kawaii and very fun. Me and my parents went to a Meido cafe in Japan, and we had a great time. But as you all know, Tokyo is a city where they expect a lot of tourists. So if you want to see real Japanese life, I would recommend to go check out Kyoto. Kyoto is a super sugoi city and has a very different atmosphere compared to Tokyo. Kyoto doesn't have the same amount of tourists, so the typical Japanese life can be experienced in Kyoto. And of course you can't forget to visit Mount Fuji when you're in Japan, an absolute must. Now there are also probably a lot of interesting spots in Japan that a lot of tourists usually don't go to, but since I don't have an experience visiting those places, I can't give you my opinions on that. Konnichiwa Sephiroth Sword 57 Senpai. This question comes from my tomodachi Simon, 27 years of age. He's kind of like my Joachim, laugh out loud. What is your version of eat, pray, love? What 3 things are truly necessary in life? This is quite an interesting topic. I would say the 3 most important things in life is honor, loyalty, and respect. In honor, it's important to value your duties and the privileges of your profession. In loyalty, your nakama is very important. No matter your profession, your kohai or your senpais are just as important as you are, and it is important to respect them. And in respect, politeness is very important. Even if the person in question does not deserve it, you can go a long way with showing respect. And those are my 3 most important traits in life that I think you soulings also can learn a lot about. Overall, I think it's important to be proud over something that you've accomplished, but also not brag about your accomplishments. And I think also having your friends back is very important, and it will keep your bond stronger than ever. And respecting people's feelings and opinions are of course very important. So honor, loyalty, and respect are my 3 important things in life. Sometime last week, my old car broke down again, and broke down for good this time. I briefly considered buying a brand new car, but let's be real, nobody has that kind of money. So my question to you is, if you have a handy guide or a collection of pro strats on how to buy a used car in nice condition without getting scammed. Now, Elof-san, I have not bought a used car myself, but I have bought used mangas before, and I think this would be some good tricks to have when you're buying used stuff online or from other people. First of all, before you actually head to the internet, like eBay or places like that, you should consider asking around first. Maybe someone you know is selling their car, or maybe there's someone that those people know that are also selling it. There is actually a pretty high chance that at least one person is selling a car in a pretty alright condition. Now this is also the best way of not getting scammed, since these people also know the people that you know. So they wouldn't dare scam you if you did anything like this. Now if this method doesn't work, and you have to buy something online, consider doing this. First of all, if you find something that you're interested in, don't just go ahead and pay them immediately. First, you should ask them to send you a picture of what they're selling with a little note with your name on it. That way you will know if they actually have this item or not. And if it's something really expensive and you want to go even further, request them to take a picture with them in the picture as well, so that you have their face and their name. Now there is no way you're going to be scammed at all. And those are all the tips I have for you regarding buying used items. But anyway, I hope this will help you on your car situation. And that is all I have to say about this topic. Konnichiwa, Seph-sama. I'm sure I speak of all of us when I ask, is there any Western RPG that are good? Any non-JRPGs you enjoy? If so, what would you recommend? I think I've talked about this in the past, but I've honestly not played a single Western RPG that are good. People keep mentioning Baldur's Gate, Planescape Torment, and games like that. They're all slow, boring, and butt ugly. But aside from RPGs, are there any Western games that I enjoy? Yes, there actually are. And I'm gonna be mentioning 2 games that I enjoy. And both of them are actually pretty recent games. Enter the Gungeon is a really fun roguelike that resembles a Sega Mega Drive game. Me and Joachim actually played it on my main channel, so if you want to go check that out, that would be really sugoi. It's a top-down shoot 'em up where you acquire different guns and upgrades to get further into the gungeon. The point is to get to the 5th and final floor of the game to defeat the last boss. But the game is very hard, and your progress in the gungeon will be determined on what kind of upgrades and guns you get along the way. Since all the gun upgrades and the map layout is different every time you enter the gungeon. Like I said, it's a roguelike, so that is a very common theme. But it is also a very fun co-op experience. So if you have a friend, like my friend Joachim, you can play it together and have a great time. Another game I'm gonna be talking about is the side-scrolling game The Messenger. This is a game that resembles a Sega Master System and Sega Mega Drive game. Not gonna spoil you on what that means, but I suggest you go and check that game out. It is a side-scroller resembling games like Shinobi, so if you've played Shinobi before, you will be very familiar with this game. Fun abilities and bosses to fight, as well as a really good story to follow. This is a game I don't want to spoil for you shortly, so go ahead and check it out. It is a very fun time. And as a bonus game, let me talk about Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon. This game was a side game that was released before Bloodstained: Ritual of the Night, and it is very sugoi. It resembles the classic Castlevania game Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Mega Drive, in that you play as different characters with different weapons and abilities. A very fun game for anyone who enjoys Castlevania, and specifically Castlevania Bloodlines for the Sega Mega Drive. A while ago, I watched a really sugoi animated series, thinking, wow, this is the greatest anime I've watched all year, and decided to look up a few more things about it, only to discover to my horror that it was not an anime or even produced in Japan. How can I tell a genuine subarashi anime apart from these baka western imitations? Now, I've talked about this before in my anime versus TV video, but it's good to bring up in a topic video like this. There are a lot of these fake animes out there, like the Castlevania Netflix series and The Last Airbender, which are both fake animes that try to trick the viewers into watching an anime when in actuality they're just watching a boring western show. But I would say the first thing you should look up is if the show has Japanese voiceovers. That should tell you immediately if the show is Japanese or not. And of course, if it's an anime that's dubbed, you shouldn't watch that at all. Now, I have seen some people being tricked by Korean or Chinese video games and animes in the past, and those are not animes either. Now, if you can't hear the difference between Korean and Chinese and Japanese, that is very weird, but I will help you learn the difference. Like I said, if you can't hear it, you need to go look for the letters that are used. This is what a Korean title would look like, and this is what a Chinese title would look like. This is how a Japanese title looks like. Now, as you can see with Korean letters, is that they have a lot of circles in their letters, which is very easy to spot. And with Chinese letters, they are very much more complicated than Japanese ones. That is the most important thing to remember. And if we look at the Japanese title, you can see it doesn't have a lot of circles and stuff like the Korean ones, and the letters are usually not as complicated as the Chinese ones. And that is how I can help you know if the show you're watching is actually Japanese. What are some of your favorite live-action movies and shows from Japan? Absolutely, I have some interesting films and shows to talk about today. Now, when it comes to the tokusatsu genre, I don't have a lot of experience. Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, and stuff like that. I do like it quite a lot, but I just haven't sunk my teeth into those kinds of shows yet. But there's one tokusatsu show that I have enjoyed immensely in the past. That show being Kaiketsu Tsubato. This show follows the super cool Hayakawa Ken on his journey to avenge his friend's death by tracking down the villain who killed his friend. This show is from 1977 and is quite old, but it is very entertaining and very cool as well. Hayakawa Ken is super sugoi, and you can't help but smile when he shows up on screen. Now, of course, when it comes to movies, there's a lot to talk about, so I'm just gonna list a few movies that I find really enjoyable that are from Japan. Since we're only talking about live action here, I'm not gonna be mentioning any animes. First off, we have Battle Royale, a movie about a class of 9th grade students who are forced to kill each other. A very interesting topic for a movie, and it features one of my favorite actors of all time, Takeshi Kitano. The next one is Jojimbo, an old Japanese classic from the 60s about a ronin who enters a village owned by two opposing gangs that this ronin have to fight off to save the village. This is seen as one of the most iconic old Japanese movies, and you should all watch it. Next up, we have Ringu. Now, how can I not mention Ringu? One of the most terrifying horror films of the century. The story revolves around a cursed videotape that is said to kill the person watching it after 7 days. A movie I don't want to talk too much about, since I will be spoiling the plot. So all I can say is, go check it out as soon as you can. And if you can't watch it on your own because you're too scared, you should have a friend or your significant other to watch it with you. And last up, we have an interesting movie from the 70s called House. Now, House is a movie about a schoolgirl and her 6 friends staying over at her aunt's house at the countryside. But little do they know is that the house is haunted. There are a lot of weird and really interesting visual effects in this movie, so it should be really entertaining to watch. This movie was written by Noruhiko Obayashi, who actually wrote this movie together with his 6-year-old daughter. Now you might be thinking that it's weird to have your 6-year-old write a horror story, but after seeing this movie you probably understand why that is such a brilliant concept. Konnichiwa Seph-sama, I have a question for you. I was fortunate enough to have a close circle of friends during my school days. I was wondering, did you also have many friends during those youthful years? Oh, I actually don't think I've talked about this before, my swordlings. Now, from I was 7 years old to I was 12 years old, which was the 1st and 6th grade of school, my only real friend there was Joachim. I couldn't really get along enough with my classmates to call them friends, but I didn't really have anyone I disliked either. But from grade 7 through 9, I had some other friends because Joachim was not in my class anymore. And even though I only hang out with those people during those 3 years, I had a really good time hanging out with them. Now, I'm sure a lot of you Americans have a particular view about jocks, but I will tell you here that jocks over here are not the same. I had a circle of friends that were all jocks and we all hang out all the time. Of course they were all doing sports and were trying to hit on girls and stuff like that, but they were very open to what I had to say about Japanese culture and stuff, always having a good time and laughing together with me. They were also very kind and generous, always trying to push me to talk to one of the really nice looking girls at school. They always told me to ask these girls out and stuff, but I wasn't really interested in that at the time, since my interest was only in Japanese girls. They were all very understanding and willing to learn and always had my back. We had a great time together watching anime clips, laughing at nerds, and talking about girls, of course, as you do at that age. So yes, here in Sweden, us jocks are very different from your jocks over there in America. But that is all I have to say about this topic. My dream is to work at a Japanese animation studio. So I was wondering, if a Westerner were to work at a Japanese game studio or animation studio, is it possible for them to create the same quality work as Japanese creators if they had a passion for Japanese culture? Okay, so this is very important, so listen here. If you are not Japanese, you will never get to the same quality as a Japanese man. But you can of course get very close to it, which is good enough. But here's the thing, you can't just move to Japan and start talking to them in English as a Westerner. No, that won't work at all. They would just see you as another rude Westerner who can't adapt to their environment. You need to have at least stayed in Japan for about 5 years before you can actually apply for work there as an animator or game designer. That means you have to study Japanese very thoroughly so that you are fluent in the language and can speak to all of the other employees there without any problem at all. And after that time, you will also have a great understanding of Japanese culture, Japanese game design philosophy, and much more. Like I said, you can't just walk in there as a Westerner and think that you can get work there. No, they will just laugh at you. Like they should. So be considerate of other Westerners who are trying to do the same thing, and follow these rules that I laid out. But like I said before, don't be discouraged to do this. This is very much a good passion to have. If you want to work for a Japanese game design or animation studio, you should definitely not be discouraged, and you should definitely go for it. Never give up! But that is pretty much all I have to say about this topic. Arigato to you for watching this video. Moshi mosh!